Today's lesson is fascinating facts about weather. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to be talking about the weather. No, we're not going to give you a weather forecast for today because we pre-record this program, so we have no idea what the weather is going to be like on February 27th. That's in the future to us. But we're going to be talking about some interesting information about the weather. And, of course, the weather refers to whether it's raining, how strong the wind is it hot? Is it cold? Is it going to snow? Is it going to be a sunny day, etc., etc.? But there are some interesting tidbits of information concerning the weather, which we are going to discuss today and next time.
Sounds very, very interesting. The weather, of course, affects our daily lives. It affects our fashion choices. And it's also something that we hear about in the news as, talking about global warming and some of the dramatic changes in the weather that we've experienced and will continue to experience as the world heats up. So weather's really interesting. It's around us all the time. It affects lots of the things we do. And apparently, according to this article, there are a lot of cool and interesting little trivia facts and phenomena involved with the weather. So let's find out about something.
Let's do that. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson, and then we'll come back to talk about it.
Fascinating facts about weather. Weather might not seem like the most gripping topic of conversation. After all, how often have you heard people make awkward small talk about it? The truth is, though, that weather is plenty fascinating if you dig a little deeper. Here are some particularly interesting facts for you to consider.
Okay, so we're talking about information about the weather in the form of fascinating facts. If something's fascinating, it is really, really interesting, and you really want to listen to that information and learn more about it. Sometimes, of course, if I attend lectures on, say, Taiwanese history, say during the Japanese occupation or something, I'm really interested in history, so I find those lectures to be fascinating. I'm sitting there with my ears wide open. I'm all ears. I want to hear all about that stuff because I find that a fascinating subject.
Absolutely fascinating subject. All right, so let's find out more about this fascinating subject. As the article begins, it says, weather might not seem like the most gripping topic of conversation. Something gripping is kind of like fascinating. And here we're saying weather might not seem like the most gripping, or it might not be very fascinating or that interesting. It's true. I mean, we can make small talk about it, but we never really focus on it for the entire 1 hour of our dinner conversation because it's not that interesting. As it says, after all, how often have you heard people make awkward small talk about it? It's perfect for small talk. If you're sitting there at the dentist's office and you're waiting and you get a little bored, you might say, so, been raining a lot recently, and oh yeah, I heard it's going to be raining even more next week. Oh, is that true? So it's small talk, but it's not really something you can really get into. We're not talking about arts and culture and politics and something interesting. It's weather, but there's more to it than you might first expect.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, weather is not really particularly gripping. It's going to rain tomorrow. Really? Wow, I want to learn more about that. Can you tell me the chemical composition of each raindrop? Like, what is the total amount of rain going to be? Is that going to affect the content of nutrients in the soil or something? I suppose some people could have a gripping conversation regarding rainstorm or something, but to most people, they just want to know whether they need to bring their umbrella or not when they go to school or work. So yes, indeed, small talk often involves conversations about sports, politics, or the weather. And the truth is, though, that weather is plenty fascinating if you dig a little deeper. Now, here we've got the word plenty, which means there's a lot of something. We've got plenty of food. Come on in and have dinner with us. But in this particular case, it means very fascinating. It's really fascinating. Although this isn't really used that often, I could say, wow, I'm plenty hungry right now. I'd like to go get a burger.
Absolutely. It's a bit more of a North American construction, I would say. You'd probably hear people say that a little bit more in North American English, but yeah, it's perfectly acceptable. So let's dig a little deeper. Let's find out a little bit more. Here are some particularly interesting facts for you to consider, and we're going to consider them as we listen to the second part of the article. heavy rain causes worms to wriggle out of the ground. If you've ever gone outside after a heavy rain, you've probably noticed numerous worms wriggling around on the ground. There are several theories about why this happens. Some believe that worms move to the surface to avoid drowning, while others argue that the sound of the rain hitting the ground makes them think there's a predator nearby, causing them to flee to the surface.
大家好，第二部分我们可以看到动词 wriggle 指的是蠕动着行进或是扭动身体一部分。例如 We can see earthworms wriggling at the bottom of the hole. 我们可以在洞的底部看到蚯蚓正在蠕动。或者 The child wriggled out of his seat. 那个小孩扭来扭去挣脱了他的座位。接着我们看到单字 flee 这个字是动词，它的意思是逃跑或是逃避。举例来说 When the war started, Joseph's parents had to flee the country. 开战时 Joseph 的双亲被迫逃离那个国家。又或者说 As the tropical storm approached the island, villagers began to flee. 随着热带风暴逼近该岛，村民就开始逃难。
Okay, now here in the second part, we're going to give you some interesting facts or fascinating facts about weather. The first one is heavy rain causes worms to wriggle out of the ground. Now, a worm is a kind of creature that lives in the ground. It's kind of long and slimy. It's like a really small snake. Some people think they're kind of disgusting. A lot of people use worms as bait when they go fishing. And in this particular case, you may have noticed that during rainstorms, sometimes you see lots of worms coming out of the ground. I remember seeing them on the streets or on mountain roads when it's raining. For some reason, they wriggle out of the ground. So when a worm or maybe even a snake moves its body back and forth, we describe that as being a wriggling motion. They wriggle in order to cross the ground.
Very interesting. Okay, so let's find out what this is all about. The worms having a big party during the rainstorms. It says if you've ever gone outside after a heavy rain, you've probably noticed numerous worms wriggling around on the ground. Yeah, this is something we've all noticed, I think, in Taiwan, maybe after a typhoon or around that time, or maybe just, during those spring and fall rain seasons. It rains a lot. You go outside or you're walking through the park or by a garden or something, and suddenly you notice, wow, all the worms are out. They're all like flopping around on the sidewalk or in the garden, in the puddles, in the mud. What's going on here? It says there are several theories about why this happens. Interesting. So these are theories. Scientists are still sort of debating or researching or studying why this happens, but these are their best guesses. Some believe that worms move to the surface to avoid drowning. Very interesting. You wouldn't think that worms could drown, but yeah, they're not fish. They're, land creatures as we are. And if you get into water and you're not a fish or a shark or a dolphin or something, you run a real risk of drowning. That is, inhaling water, breathing in water to your lungs so that you die in the water, basically. To drown is to die in the water because, swallowed too much water, you breathed it in, it got in your lungs, stopped you from breathing, and unfortunately, you died. And that can also happen to worms, it seems. That's quite surprising. While others, these are other scientists, other people who study these animals, while others argue that the sound of the rain hitting the ground makes them think there's a predator nearby, causing them to flee to the surface. I don't know enough about worm behavior to really understand why this makes sense, but apparently the sound of the rain makes the worms think that there's something dangerous nearby, maybe underground, like an insect that might eat them. So they get out of the ground, they flee to the surface. When you flee, you run away from danger or a dangerous situation. You flee from a person trying to attack you if you're not going to fight them. You flee from a building if it's on fire, something like that. So you run away from a danger. That's what we're talking about. Fleeing is running away from a danger. I'm not sure how coming out of the dirt where you can be seen and eaten by birds is safer, but as I said, I'm not an expert on worm behavior, but maybe they're more afraid of what might be under the ground than what's on the surface or above the ground. But in either case, worms are getting out of there because they think they could be getting eaten soon.
Yep, you're spot on there, Mike. But again, worms don't communicate with humans very well. You can't just ask a worm, Hey, Mr. Worm, why do you guys wriggle out of the ground during a rainstorm? Well, I'll tell you, it's because we're sick of being in the dirt all the time and we just want to go up and clean off a bit in the rain. Of course, you can't ask the worms that question, so you need to have theories. And again, we've got a couple of them here. Some people think they move to the surface so they don't drown in the water, seeping down into the dirt. And the other theory is that they think predators are nearby, so they try to get out of the dirt in order to escape those predators, so they flee or escape to the surface. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part. Here's another small fact regarding the weather. Yeah, what happens when you hear those crickets? Let's find out.
You can tell the temperature by listening to the chirping of a cricket. As weird as it sounds, a cricket can function as a thermometer. These insects contract their muscles to produce a regular chirping. The warmer the temperature, the more often a cricket can contract its muscles to produce this sound. Conversely, the cooler it is, the less frequently a cricket chirps. To calculate the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, simply count the number of chirps in a 14-second period and add 40 to that number.
第三部分我们看到单字 chirp， 这个字指的是鸟或是昆虫啾啾叫，或是发出叽叽声。例如 The bird chirped as it hopped from branch to branch. 那只鸟在树枝上跳来跳去时，发出啾啾叫的声音。或是 Brian's bird doesn't really sing, but it chirps from time to time. Brian 的鸟不太会唱歌，但它偶尔会啾啾叫。接下来我们看到形容词 weird， 这个字的意思是怪异的或是不寻常的。我们可以说 Alex took his car to the mechanic when it started making weird noises. Alex 把车送去给修车工人，因为车子开始发出怪声。或者我们可以说 Lester didn't like the story because it had a weird ending that didn't make sense. Lester 不喜欢这个故事，因为它的结局怪异不合理。再来我们看到单字 conversely， 这个字是副词，指的是相反的或是反过来说。例如 I love playing sports. Conversely, my friend prefers playing guitar in her spare time. 我喜欢运动，相反的，我的朋友更喜欢在空闲时间弹吉他。也可以说 My sister hates exercise and takes the bus to work. Conversely, I bike to work every day. 我的姐姐讨厌运动，所以坐公车上班。相反的，我每天骑自行车上班。接着我们看到动词 calculate， 意思是计算、估算或是推算。举例来说 The accountant has calculated that the company could save money by moving to online retail. 会计师算出公司可借由改做网络零售来省钱。或是 I've calculated the cost of traveling to Europe, and I think we can afford it. 我已经计算了去欧洲旅行的费用，我想我们负担得起。最后我们看到形容词 Fahrenheit， 指的是华氏温度的。举例来说 At 94 degrees Fahrenheit, it was quite uncomfortable in the room. 在华氏94度时，待在房间里相当不舒服。或是 The temperature was 70 degrees Fahrenheit today, which was perfect for my hike. 今天的温度是华氏70度，非常适合我去登山。
Okay, so here's the fact. You can tell the temperature by listening to the chirping of a cricket. A cricket is a small black creature. It kind of looks like a small grasshopper, basically. And, if you're in the country at night, you can often hear the chirping of crickets.
Yeah, something crickets, grasshoppers, locusts, they're all kind of similar. There are some differences there, but they're, of course, famous for being able to jump very far. And yeah, making this I can't really do it that high, but that kind of sound, I think maybe you think it's relaxing. I associate with summer evenings in the countryside on my aunt's farm or something, you know. So often it's a very sort of peaceful sound. But why can the sound help you understand or know about the temperature in the weather, the air temperature? Well, let's find out. It says, as weird as it sounds, a cricket can function as a thermometer. That's basically what it said there in that little title. And this is weird. This is strange, unusual, not normal, not something you would expect, and something that you would say, really? If someone told you, because it sounds so unusual or strange or weird. It is weird that a cricket can function as a thermometer. It can work as or do the job of a thermometer. And a thermometer is a special device, piece of, I guess, scientific equipment that measures temperature. We use thermometers in our home to see how warm it is outside, to see what the weather's like in your kitchen, to see how hot the oven is or how hot the meat is that you're cooking, that kind of thing. So a cricket can work as a thermometer. In other words, it works as a machine that tells you the temperature. And I'm now going to ask, what and how and why?
Now, these insects contract their muscles to produce a regular chirping sound. Mike tried to give you a sample of that sound. I can do this sound here. But that's more like a frog than a cricket. But I think it's kind of similar, except that would be much lower than the cricket sounds. But in any case, they produce these sounds by contracting their muscles. So if you contract something, you kind of move it together to make it closer. Like if you're lifting weights, you contract your muscles in order to pick up some dumbbells.
Absolutely. So they're contracting their muscles, and I guess by doing that, something happens in their body and a sound is produced. Okay, so we know that's the chirping of crickets. We hear it. It reminds us of a summer evening. All right, fine. Conversely, it says the cooler it is, the less frequently a cricket chirps. So this is how it relates to temperature. When the weather is warmer, the cricket contracts its muscles more frequently, and then conversely, or in the opposite way, or in the other way, you know, the directly opposite or directly other way, the cooler it is, the less frequently a cricket chirps. All right. So conversely, for example, you would say if you don't study, you'll get a bad score on the test. Conversely, if you study a lot, you'll get a higher score. It's like the opposite result for the opposite action. So when the temperature cools, the cricket chirps less frequently. All right. So that's helpful. Now, how do we turn that into a temperature reading? It says to calculate the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, simply count the number of chirps in a 14-second period, okay, and add 40 to that number. So you will need a stopwatch or a watch of some kind, something you can measure 14 seconds in. In those 14 seconds, count the chirps. Let's say you come up with 9, then that means the temperature is 49. This is how you calculate the temperature. Now, the number 49 might seem like a weird temperature. We'll get to that in a second. But when you calculate something, basically you're doing math. You're figuring out the solution to a problem. Probably a problem that involves numbers of some kind, calculating, you know, the number of inches in a meter, something like that, or calculating also the number of people that can come to your party, or calculating how early you have to leave to get to the train on time. So you're figuring out things, and it often involves some math and some numbers, even in a very simple way. And here we're calculating the temperature, but the number that you will get if you follow this method will not be the temperature in Celsius, it will be the temperature in Fahrenheit. And since mostly Americans use Fahrenheit and I'm Canadian, I will let Roger explain what Fahrenheit is.
Basically, water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit and it boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. But in any case here, I suppose there is an equal formula or a similar formula for degrees Celsius if you want to do this. And some of you might be asking, why would you want to do this? Okay, you got a thermometer in your house, you can know the temperature that way, but you have to remember that sometimes life in the country can be very boring, and you've already heard your Uncle Myron tell the same stories over and over again. Sometimes it's fun to just listen to those crickets, count their chirps, and you can figure out what the temperature is. It is very fascinating. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's turn things over to Hanny, who actually is from the country.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。在课文第二部分有一句它用到 some 点点点 while others 点点点来表达有些人怎么样而有些人怎么样。那当我们用 some 点点点 others 点点点，就是在没有限定范围的人事物里面去列举出两种群体的状况，表达有些点点点有些点点点。好，那我们也可以把这个 some 和 other 当形容词来用，写作 some 名词点点点 other 名词点点点。只是如果要避免重复名词的话， other 名词这个部分常常改用代名词 others 取代。举例来说， Some people love horror movies while others don't。 有些人爱看恐怖片，而有些人不爱。好，句子里面我们用 others don't， 这个 others 代名词就是用来代替 other people 来避免重复。好，那我们在课文第三部分有一句则写到 As weird as it sounds, a cricket can function as a thermometer。 虽然听起来很奇怪，但蟋蟀可以作为温度计。句子里面用到 function as 来表达充当什么什么，那么 function 在这边是当不及物动词去表达起作用啊，发挥功能。好，那么同学们也许会觉得奇怪，句子里面又没有出现 though although 或是 while 之类的连接词，怎么会有虽然点点点但是点点点的那种语义呢？好，其实 as weird as it sounds 也可以写作 weird as it sounds。 那么形容词 weird 后方的那个 as 它就跟 though 意思相同，是表达虽然尽管。那这是 though although 引导让步副词子句的倒装句型，目的是要强调句首的形容词。好，那我们就先来还原倒装前的句型咯。原本可以写作 though 或是 although， 主词加 be 动词加形容词去表达虽然怎么样怎么样。现在我要强调这个子句当中的形容词时，可以把这个形容词移到句首，形成倒装句型，变成形容词加上 as 或 though加主词加 be 动词。要特别注意，在这个倒装句型中，连接词只能用 as 或是 though， 不能使用 although， 所以才会看到原本倒装前我们用 though 或 although， 可是倒装后却是用 as 或是 though 来表示咯。好，那我们来看个例子。Although it may seem tricky, it's actually quite easy。 虽然它看起来好像很困难，但它其实蛮简单的。现在要倒装句型，我们就先将形容词 tricky 移到句首，然后把 although 改成 though 或是 as， 句子就写作 tricky though it may seem， 或是 tricky as it may seem, it's actually quite easy。好，那另外提醒同学们，在美语当中呢，常常会在强调的形容词前面加上 as， 写成 as 形容词 as 加主词加 be 动词。像课文句子，它就是在形容词 weird 前面加上 as， 所以 as weird as it sounds 或者是 weird as it sounds 就是要表达说，虽然听起来很奇怪，但怎么样怎么样，这边用来强调这个形容词 weird。那如果不倒装的话，你其实也可以把它写成 though it sounds weird 或是Although it sounds weird。 好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Fascinating. The doctor told a fascinating story about saving a patient's life in a war zone. Flee. The family fled from the house after it caught on fire. Weird. Some people think Warren is a little weird, but his friends like him anyway. Thermometer. The mother wanted to check her child's temperature, but she didn't have a thermometer. Calculate. Candace calculated the total cost by adding up the prices for all of the items she bought. Fahrenheit. According to the Fahrenheit scale, water freezes at a temperature of 32 degrees. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.